It's Friday the 13th, which I think is a lucky day. We're in Bratislava, and the weekend is about to begin. So I hope you're all very relaxed. And I'm really honored, first of all, to be invited to Globsec. Secondly, to chair this particular plenary session. And most of all, to have two very distinguished guests on my panel, the Prime Minister of the Republic of Montenegro, Igor Lukšić, and the European Commissioner for Enlargement and Neighborhood Policy and Affairs. These, as the cliche goes, are two persons who need no particular introduction, but let me say just two words. Prime Minister Lukšić is one of the up-and-coming leaders in Europe. He has had a number of important and distinguished posts, among others Minister of Finance of his country, and is, if I dare say, one of our younger European prime ministers. I will single out the fact that at the beginning of his tenure, he invited for conversations most of the leaders of civil society in Montenegro, which I think is very important because it distinguishes the understanding of democracy as, in a positive sense, a conflictual society where state and society do need to be in an engaged dialogue, which is never ideal, of course, because if it were ideal, it would be a sort of authoritarian regime where everything seems to be in synchronicity. Because of a dialogue, because of this conflict that is defined by institutions, rules, and procedures, I think societies move on. And I hope the Prime Minister will address some of those issues in the dialogue between state and society in Montenegro. European Commissioner Stefan Füle, who has held also a number of posts for his country, the Czech Republic, ambassador to NATO, among all other things. I'd like to single out, as far as he's concerned, an incredibly positive attitude and proactiveness and creativeness, I would add, in moving the whole enlargement process forward, not to mention his work in the neighborhood. But the fact that with a country like Macedonia that has been a candidate now for 7 years, they came up, he and his team in Brussels, with this idea of high-level accession dialogue, I think was applauded by many of us, not only in the region, of how you move out of stagnation, how you go around something that seems like an inevitable obstacle that you all know is, shall I only say it, the name issue in this region. So congratulations to you, Commissioner, for the work of yourself and your team. Finally, and not to belabor, because we have a short session here, the fact that Globsec is a venue where we have been hearing already very much about enlargement and the unfinished business in our first panel from Prague to Chicago. This particular panel, and then this evening, the panel devoted to the Western Balkans and the dinner on Kosovo, I think are extremely revealing of the awareness that this part of Europe, the Western Balkans or Southeastern Europe, and the presidents of Slovenia and Croatia on their plenary panel underscored this, is something where Europe and the region have to prove themselves. If the European Union and NATO are not capable of integrating this part of Europe, then how will we be able to solve the much greater challenges further afield in the Middle East, in North Africa, in Afghanistan, and in Iraq? So this, in a sense, is a testing ground of the capacity and capability of the Euro-Atlantic family to deal with something that I call low-hanging fruit. We are close to a joint success here, and this is where the optimism of Europe works, the soft power of Europe works. The attractiveness, with all of the crisis that is being addressed, works. The fact that Croatia is going to become a member, the fact that Montenegro will begin accession talks soon, the fact that Serbia got candidacy, the fact that Kosovo has now its roadmap for visas and the opening of the road towards a feasibility study that in turn leads to a stabilization and association agreement. Albania, hopefully getting candidacy soon. Bosnia, that has moved with a government and that is looking at a membership action plan, hopefully in the near future. All of these are promising signs, and yet we all know that the challenges are huge. So, as a backdrop, I would like to give the floor to both of our distinguished panelists, and then we will open it up for a question and answers, and we have to finish promptly in about 40 minutes. So, Prime Minister Lukšić, please take the floor.
Thank you very much, Mr. Vojvoda. First of all, let me begin by thanking the organizers for inviting me to this renowned security forum. It is especially important because it is always a good opportunity to exchange views and rethink some ideas. And in case of Montenegro, it is especially valuable because we are ahead of two major events of this year that concern Montenegro. Chronologically, it is next month's Chicago summit of NATO countries, and in June we hope to commence accession talks with the European Union based on the decision that European Council made on the 9th of December last year. There's been already some fine words said in the course of this forum about Montenegro, and I appreciate it very much. I'm grateful for that. I think one cannot emphasize enough the importance of both the NATO and EU enlargement process for the countries such as Montenegro, for the countries of the Western Balkans. And therefore, I'd like to once again point out that from the security point of view, and we're talking about the NATO as first and foremost security integration process, NATO remains guarantor of peace and stability in the Western Balkans. It is important to set the ground for political reforms, for the building of the functional economy, which is the intrinsic value of the European Union integration process. But one cannot go without the other. And I believe that in the region of the Western Balkans, those two processes should go hand in hand. And let me remind all of you who were here this morning. There was one interesting question which I don't remember received an adequate response at the first panel we had this morning, where three presidents spoke about also similar topic. The question went something like, should NATO further enlarge because it may decrease efficiency? Or there are some pundits who suggest that might be the problem of NATO, should enlarge too much. I believe that NATO remains a global backbone of security. And I think that NATO should enlarge as much as possible because given that there are countries who aspire to become members of NATO. Internally, the solution is something which is already an important topic of the NATO summit, such as smart defense, pooling and sharing, making system works from the logistical point of view in a more efficient way. But from the security point of view, it is indispensable to have countries which belong to the Western Balkans, all of us who want to become part of the NATO, inside the NATO. I think that contributes to the overall security because, you know, Western Balkans has progressed a lot, as Mr. Vojvoda has reminded us. But it is not that issues are all off the table. There are still certain outstanding issues. And I believe that NATO integration process and the enlargement of NATO, it is a cornerstone of the stability in our region, and therefore remains important, as Western Balkans need to be kept in focus for the time being still. It is even more important given all the global changes and given that some other regions tend to acquire more focus. With regards to the June's hopefully positive decision of the European General Affairs Council, actually, and the commencement of the accession talks, we hope to have sometime by the end of June. I think that we have shown commitment, we have shown a lot of energy, and we have invested best possible efforts in past year or so since Montenegro received candidate status back in 2010. at the European Council's summit. And there's been a number of issues we had to deal with, from our efforts to improve the rule of law, reform public administration, pass legislation and fight against corruption, organized crime, reach out towards civil sector, reach out towards media, enable media friendlier environment for the freedom of expression, freedom of thoughts, dealing with the issue of internally displaced people, building administrative capacities within our parliament to exercise more quality supervisory role. Those were all the benchmarks we had to deal with. And what matters also is that these two streams of integration processes, NATO and the EU, are actually quite compatible. Because dealing with the rule of law, dealing with the democratization of the society, making it more transparent, and so on, fighting against organized crime and corruption, it is quite compatible because it is a necessary precondition for both integration processes, though dynamically it may go different way. So dealing with European benchmarks, I think it has made Montenegrin society more open, more transparent. I think we are now running through the stage which is incredibly important for the future of setting new sort of values in Montenegro. And therefore, I'm looking forward to the next rounds, to the next stage, which is accession talks. We are already getting ourselves prepared by setting up accession architecture, picking people who will be in the chair of holding those talks, and so on and so on. And we're focusing also on those chapters which very early will be open, those chapters dealing with judiciary reforms, fundamental rights, and so on, 23 and 24. And I very much appreciate the role of Commissioner Füle and the role of the European Commission that has devised the new model, new approach for the Western Balkan countries to lift all the concerns that anybody can have in terms that whether we are ready to join European Union, given that one of the biggest challenges is to deal with corruption, organized crime, fundamental rights. And I should also agree with the assessment on the region. Year after, or year before, or year ago, rather, when you look at the track record of the Western Balkans from the European point of view, I think there's been some positive, major and positive developments. And I think it is the momentum we need to keep in order to really pass this point in time, which I'm sure is critical because we are passing the point of no return. I'm sure that ahead there is visible, already tangible European perspective for the countries in the region. There's more to be done, but I'm sure that opening accession talks for Montenegro after Croatia basically is inside, Serbia getting candidate status, holding high dialogue with Macedonia, Bosnia and Herzegovina sorting out certain issues, Kosovo getting feasibility study, regain stability in Albania. These are all good news, and we need to keep the momentum, and that's why my argument is that Western Balkans deserve to be still in the focus. Thank you.
Prime Minister, thank you very much for the brevity and conciseness, but also the very substantive words that you gave here. I think that if I can speak for the region immodestly, I think everyone's very happy that the rules are being applied more rigorously, because this means that our societies will strengthen their rule of law, and that in turn works for the citizens who are simply then going to be able to live in a more predictable and secure society. And of course, one of the people who's in charge and seeing to it that this process is not only substantive but is moving along is Commissioner Füle. So, Stefan, please give us your thoughts before we open the Q&A.
Thank you very much, Ivan, and pleasure to be back in Bratislava. And very happy to be in the same panel with you, Prime Minister. And I think that your introductory statement has clearly shown why indeed Montenegro is having the best chance to be the next one. The European Union opens the accession negotiations, and I hope that June and still the Danish presidency will be able to deliver on that after you delivered. Now, 4 points, maybe not in the perfect order, but the points I feel very strongly about. The first one is continuation. The second one is credibility. The third one is transformation power. And the fourth one is bigger picture. Those are the 4 elements I'm trying to build the enlargement process on. What I mean by continuity. Ivana, if I look a year back and the discussion within the European Union in the peak of the economic crisis, the crisis of the confidence, particularly as far as the Eurozone, it's quite amazing that at the time the people are talking about the possibility of some countries leaving the European Union or the Eurozone. We have indeed so many countries, aspirant countries and candidate countries who still want to become a European Union member states. And I think that this is the element we should not forget. And I think this is extremely important that despite some calls from certain corners, we have not messed it up, the enlargement on one side and the challenges the European Union is facing. Because the enlargement is not a part of the problem, it's a part of the solution. There are many problems in the European Union. Many of them we created ourselves. Many others are imposed on us by globalization. And I strongly believe that enlargement is a way not only to tackle it, but to address the most effectively the effects of the globalization. The globalization meaning you hardly could build a wall around you. You are as exposed as any other point on our smaller and smaller planet. Second, credibility. They're asking me sometimes why you are not providing more money for public campaign because there is not really that huge support as far as the public opinion among the member states for the enlargement. And I was always saying, yeah, the key is not in spending the money for some kind of artificial campaign. The key is to make it credible, the process again. The key is to put the enlargement policy where it belonged, and it has been the most successful external policy of the European Union. There has been a number of the credibility issues. The good thing is that we have learned our lesson, and that Croatia is the first country sort of going through the what I would call new cycle of enlargement. It's not about us changing the rules of the games. You could hardly change the European Union acquis, but you change the way how to adapt that acquis by the candidate country. Opening, closing benchmark, track record, Croatia has experienced that. Montenegro is going to be, and I'm confident about that, is going to be the first country which, in addition to that, will go through a new experience. And opening the chapters 23 and 24, we're talking about judiciary, fundamental rights, that's chapter 23. We're talking about judiciary, security, as far as the chapter 24. We're talking about the soft acquis here. We're talking about the 2 chapters which are directly linked to the values the European Union is based on. We're talking about the 2 issues, 2 chapters, where it's important not only the ticking the boxes, whether the legislation has been approved, institutions established, but where you need also to see the track record, whether that legislation and the institutions actually deliver upon the expectations, and not only expectation of the Brussels, but expectation of the people. We're talking about the rule of law. We're talking about the independence of justice. So Montenegro is going to be the first one, where we're opening those 2 chapters at the beginning, and we close those 2 chapters at the end of the accession process. In addition to the opening and closing benchmark, introducing interim benchmark, which is important because we bringing the member states more in this negotiating process, and it is important for the credibility. I don't want the member states and their citizens to ask at the end of the process, is the country really up to? I want that impression and that knowledge to be there, to be built throughout that process through a more active involvement. Enlargement has always been both technical and political project. I'm definitely the one who calls for more of the political steering of this process. The credibility works both ways, and I have alluded to that. It means not only the candidate country delivering in a credible way, but also us delivering on the promises. Whenever the homework is being done, then the decision by the member states should follow to move the country forward. The transformation power of enlargement is very much connected with the credibility. Look at the Croatia 10 years ago when it applied for the European Union membership, and look at a different Croatia today. We're talking about the Southeast Europe, about the Western Balkans in this bloc. So we're talking about the countries in transition. We're talking about the countries which have to deal with not only totalitarian past, but the nationalism. That cannot be done successfully outside the framework of the European Union enlargement. And through those 35 chapters, through this innovative and more credible approach to enlargement, we are becoming a part of that transition of both the countries and region. And point number 4, bigger picture. Ivan, you were saying about the magnetic power of the European Union, but if you look around the European Union, I would say the competition of the model of governance is bigger and bigger. The competition is there. And it's not, you cannot just sit on your hands and believe that there will be more and more countries by the virtue of that magnetism sort of wanting to join the European Union. They have other options, more easier one. That's the first point. The second point is we are ignoring the fact that 19th and 20th century were not really a normal century from the sense of the human development. What I'm saying is that in those 2 centuries, a small state, a mid-sized country, could take an advantage of the Industrial Revolution and then play a leading role in the world. I might be referring to the United Kingdom and the Commonwealth. In the 21st century, at the time of globalization, nothing like that is possible. So size matters again. Is 500 million enough to be able to compete with China and India and withstand the pressure of those who might not have the same set of values, but they have gas and oil? I'm saying it might not be enough, and we have to be more creative in looking beyond our borders. And the last point, you were talking both about the synergy of the EU and NATO enlargement. I felt that synergy a couple of years ago when we were talking about the Central Europe. I think we are lacking the same synergy at this point of the time, the synergy which would have the positive effect on the whole region. Because, and I worked, you made that point, Ivan, I worked in North Atlantic Council. At that time we were talking about Article 5, we were talking about the defense, we were talking about the defense in terms of soldiers, territory, and so on. Do I have a feeling that now I'm working in a different field? No, I don't. I think I'm working in the field of defending our values. And through the enlargement and through the neighborhood policy, an active neighborhood policy, we actually delivering not only on the security element, but also a defense element. So the closer interaction between the European Union and NATO would have had a positive impact not only on the region we're discussing, but also our neighborhood, whether it's east or south.
Thank you very much, Commissioner Füle. This morning, in fact, President of Slovakia, Ivan Gašparović, in fact, mentioned the difficulty of the relationship between the European Union and NATO and the need to enhance it. I had the pleasure of hosting High Representative Catherine Ashton 3 days ago in Washington at the German Marshall Fund, where in fact she said that there were enormous efforts on her part and of Secretary General Rasmussen to actually move this forward, and she actually commended Turkey and Cyprus for actually slowly behind the scenes helping this forward. And I think we'd all like to see much more on that front, because this is a Euro-Atlantic effort, and the one without the other cannot work. But we have exactly about 20 minutes. I'll throw it open to the floor, and as our host Rastislav Kačer says, it's a bit difficult to see, but please raise your hands high and introduce yourself and ask your questions.
There is one hand.
There, okay, I'm being helped by Prime Minister Lukšić.
In the middle.
In the middle there.
Charles Tannock, Member of the European Parliament. I'm also the Permanent Rapporteur for Montenegro, and I don't need to tell Stefan Füle how much I sing the praises of the work of the government of Mr. Lukšić as the good news story in the Western Balkans. But there are other more serious intractable problems in the Western Balkans in terms of Euro-Atlantic aspirations, and of course Kosovo has been mentioned, and Macedonia. And I wanted to kind of draw a link between the NATO accession process for Macedonia and the recent court case of the International Court of Justice, which ruled against Greece over the name question being used as a way of vetoing Macedonian accession to NATO, and why there's been such a silence from the European Union. I can understand the delicacies of the issue with Greece as a full member and so on, but I do think the European Union prides itself on observing international law and upholding it. And when the ICJ comes out with a fairly clear judgment that Greece, as it were, violated its obligations to Macedonia by blocking its accession to NATO, that a similar principle should apply as well as the Macedonian process towards European Union accession. So would Stefan Füle like to comment on that rather tricky and delicate issue? Thank you.
Yeah, this is one of the issues we are debating outside and inside the framework of the European Parliament with Charles. Very nice to see you here in Bratislava. And I know how devoted you are, and not only to that region. I think I already expressed myself, actually, on the platform of the European Parliament on this issue. And there are the 3 points I made at that time. The first one, that we took a very good note of that court's finding. Well, we have never been a part of the deliberation, and the deliberation had no relationship to what we're doing, so we declined to comment. The second, our interpretation is that it focuses on the issue of one specific issue related to the Bucharest NATO summit and the decision at that point of not reaching consensus of inviting Skopje to join the North Atlantic Treaty Organization. So rather than looking in the future, it looked in the past. And the third important element, which is reflected actually in the findings of the ICJ and the final verdict, is a call on both parties to find a solution to the name issue, which I consider to be the most important part, because it looks of that findings, because it looks into the future. It calls on both countries to find the solution, which would allow not only the NATO agenda to go forward, but also the European Union one.
If I may abuse the chair for 30 seconds, were we living in a somewhat more perfect world, I think at Chicago, those of us who are from the region or friends of the region or working on the region would like to see Macedonia become a member of NATO, would like to see Bosnia invited for a membership action plan, would like to see Montenegro make the next step. But of course, we don't live in that approximation of a perfect world, and we will get much less than that. Hopefully, the wording of the Chicago NATO summit will be forceful enough to indicate that those will be the next steps ASAP, as soon as possible, because it is very important not only for the larger project of the Europe whole, free and at peace, but it's very important for the internal security of each country and the security of the region. I saw a question back there.
Democrats in Parliament.
If you could repeat that,
Yeah.
because the
Johannes Ahlefeld, Foreign Policy Advisor to the German Social Democrats in Parliament. I think I recollect, Commissioner Füle, that the Council didn't follow your recommendation with regards to Serbia to grant candidate status in autumn, but postponed it to gain further concessions with a view to relations between Serbia and Kosovo. Is this, in a sense, political conditionality the way to go forward? And is that, from your point of view, a constructive way of moving ahead? And to Prime Minister Luksic, your separation with Serbia has happened much earlier and happened in a much more constructive way, in a sense. Is there something that we can learn in terms of improving relations in the region between Kosovo and
Yeah, the first question with the... That's not me. Whether it is a conditionality, of course it is a conditionality. I mean, the whole enlargement process is about conditionality. Whether it's a constructive conditionality, of course it is constructive conditionality, because it's moving us forward, it's moving the aspirant country, or in other cases, candidate country forward. At the beginning, I was talking about the enlargement being both the technical process, but also a political one. I made point about the member states, politically steering the enlargement process and strengthening that political steering. What has happened in December with our recommendation is that the member states have strengthened the conditionality we put forward, and they added the need to reach a deal between Belgrade and Pristina on the regional cooperation. the rest you know. After a number of the discussions in Belgrade and in Pristina through I think it was the 9th round of the dialogue, they have found such a formula. And in addition of starting the implementation of those agreements already reached within those framework, it has opened the way for the candidate status to be granted to Serbia. Now, what is important that after local parliamentary and presidential elections, Serbia not only to continue the reform process, which we so highly appreciated in our last progress report and opinion before, but that also delivers on this one key priority, and it is to make further efforts to normalize the relationship between Belgrade and Pristina. It is a conditionality, yes, absolutely. It's a clear conditionality, but the one the benefit of Serbs, the people living in Kosovo and the whole region.
Prime Minister.
We have always attached incredible importance to regional cooperation, and we have always tried to be part of the solution, never a problem. 10 or 11 years ago, back in 2001, 2002, it was quite difficult to explain to many people in Montenegro why, instead of organizing a referendum on independence, we should establish the State Union of Serbia and Montenegro and delay possibility to organize a referendum for at least 3 years. Then in 2006, it was pretty hard to explain to many people why, instead of normal 50% plus 1, we should impose 55% threshold to gain independence in Montenegro. The point is that if you want to be part of the solution, not part of the problem, sometimes you need to give more. You have to concede more. You need to try to invite them in broader terms. And that's why we encourage dialogue, because vast majority of people like agreements. They don't like disagreements. And and from time to time I'm asked, what it is that Montenegro brings to the NATO or the EU? You're a small country, small-sized country, small territory, so what's the point? My response is that Montenegro could bring into the NATO and the EU certain virtues, such as positive multi-ethnic model that works in Western Balkans and that we cherish through dialogue, through trying to find consensus on most sensitive issues, and through that we invest in long-term stability. And also from the security point of view, Northern Mediterranean NATO coverage cannot be fully covered without Montenegrin coast. So there is certain added value we can bring into the NATO and into the EU, and that's why we very much and very, very frequently point out that it is important that NATO also commits to open door policy, and that's what we also expect from Chicago. That's important because being a positive example or putting positive pressure on some of the countries in the region by doing what we're trying to do, I think that helps the broader context. And that's how I see it can also help relationship between Belgrade and Kosovo, or Belgrade and Pristina, or to help resolve any other outstanding issue in the Western Balkans.
Thank you, Prime Minister. We've been given a precious 5 minutes more, so I will ask Bruce Jackson, and I've seen 2 questions, but please keep it very short, and then I'll return to our 2 distinguished speakers. Microphone. Sorry, Tim. I hate to do this to you.
Bruce Jackson, Project on Transitional Democracies. I just wanted to push a little further on the NATO-EU relationship and Stefan's big picture. NATO and the EU have been complementary and parallel on their membership processes since Ron Asmus first wrote about it in the early 1990s. It seems recently that these processes are detached a bit. In the last panel, membership was never mentioned. They talked about nothing but modernization, but membership was not a modernization. It appears to some that NATO lost the membership recipe at the Bucharest summit, just as the EU has eloquently found it and is doing all sorts of exciting things. Do any of the panelists worry that NATO is falling behind on the job of a Europe whole and free?
Okay. Back there. There was a question back there.
Thank you.
Okay, over there, please. Can we get a microphone over there?
Thank you very much. My name is Venera Hairolahu from the Kosovar Civil Society Foundation. My question goes to Commissioner Füle. You mentioned the very important point that is credibility. Credibility gained by both sides delivering on obligations and commitments. The question is, if Kosovo would be delivering and results with a positive feasibility report, would the EU be able to deliver on the commitment to create the possibility for entering contractual relations through an SEA signing?
Thank you.
Stefan. And concluding thoughts.
Yeah, Bruce, I don't want whether, I'm not sure whether it's right to say that NATO has lost the momentum as far as the enlargement policy. But I think that in Bucharest something has happened. Something we still try to find a peace with. Because in Bucharest, with all the goodwill, we have created a very strange animal. In Bucharest, we have changed the rules of the games. We're still paying the price for that. Until Bucharest, the rules of the games were help us with the means to transform our country, getting closer and closer to the requirements, and then, based on our progress, let's make a final political decision whether to accept us as a member or not. What we have done in Bucharest was, yes, we accept you as a member. You will be a NATO member. But no, you will not get a membership action plan. You will not get the means how to get there. And it seemed to me as an effort, as a compromise, you know, to help those who didn't want to see the Bucharest as losing the momentum. But as a result, we have created the animal. And I leave it up to a strange animal. And I leave it up to the analysts to speculate whether what then has happened in Georgia to a certain extent is not also a reflection of us creating the animals we don't know how to deal with. On the credibility, let me not speculate about the last steps when we are sort of at the first couple of steps as far as the feasibility study. The feasibility study is, yes, on one side, a chance for Kosovo to move forward boldly on the reform and enlargement-related reform agenda. And the truth is that more could have been done in the recent months. But it's also a possibility for us to analyze the political, economic, but also legal issues related to the stabilization and association agreement. So let us wait for the analysis in all those fields, including also the legal one. But in general terms, I tend to agree with you that credibility credibility to be effective, it needs always to work both ways. In other words, if Kosovo delivers on the expectations stemming from the requirements as defined for starting the SAA, then the European Union and its member states better deliver on their part of the delivery, on their part of credibility, and indeed enter into this contractual arrangement between the European Union on one side and Kosovo on the other side.
Prime Minister, some final thoughts.
Some final thoughts, and I think Bruce Jackson's question provides the possibility for some concluding thoughts. I think that one has to understand the identity of the European Union integration process. And if you manage to understand it, or at least if you accept my view, then it explains why enlargement policy has been one of the most effective ones. And that's why further enlargement process helps both understand the identity, but also helps support the process of building European structures which will efficiently and effectively meet the demands of the countries in the modern days challenges, which also Commissioner Fuller was talking about, referring to what was going on in previous centuries. I think if one accepts that NATO should also be a sort of if one accepts the view that NATO is the backbone of global security, or Euro-Atlantic integration process, as we also frequently refer to it, then membership of the federal enlargement cannot be put in question. Of course, there are individual countries who would accept or ask to get in, but there are some other countries who don't want to get into the NATO. But I think it is vital to encourage those who want to get in. And I absolutely agree that those two integration processes need to be attached one to the other. And I think most important point was that if we take it that way, one integration process provides for security, the other integration process provides for building of democratic system and functional market economy, then I think the problem should be resolved.
Before I hand it back to Robin Shepherd and the Globsec, please join me in thanking Prime Minister Lukšić and Commissioner Füle.
Thank you very much, ladies and gentlemen. If you could stay in your seats, because the next session starts right away, as soon as the Prime Minister and the Commissioner